In today's Legal on 4, understanding community property. Arizona is one of a few states that applies the unique law of community property to the assets of a husband and wife. Most people have an idea of what it is, but like a lot of legal issues, there are many half-truths and myths about it. Our legal eagle, Craig Wisdom, joins us now. Probably the biggest myth about community property is that when you get married, everything that each spouse owns belongs to the other one.
Exactly, and that's what you hear from a lot of clients.
Yeah.
We get a lot of questions about that, and that's not really true for the most part. What happens is when you get married, community property means anything you earn during the marriage becomes community property. And community property means half of it's mine, half of it's yours, and both of us are able to control it.
So what's the point then of a prenup, if that's the case?
Well, it can change the law, it can keep track, it can change that presumption, it can change that law, it can also keep track of. The thing is, once you come into a marriage with, even without a prenup or anything like that, is your separate property. So if someone has $5 million and the other person has 10 bucks and they get married and they get divorced 2 days later, the rich person still has $5 million and the other person has $10. It isn't that half and half. But what happens in the law is we start with the assumption that if you're married, everything you own is community property. And if you're able to keep track of things and say, no, I owned this before I was married, or my mom gave this to me, or I inherited this when my dad dies, that is still separate property. So it doesn't all become community property. Generally, what's really community property is what you earn. I mean, sweat equity, what you spend time going to your job and things like that. That's
anything that you purchase together. Exactly,
that's community property. And again, that's basically a partnership half and half. There's some income tax advantages to that apply in limited situations once the first spouse dies. So as long as things are community property, or you really do consider things half and half, you might want to check with your attorney or an accountant to make sure you get the tax benefits that go along with that. But if you come into a marriage with property, even if you don't have a prenup, if you want to keep stuff yours, you know, even if you're not worried about divorce, but you just want to say, this is mine and I want to keep charge of it, you just have to keep good records, keep track of it, you know, keep it clear, so if someone says, was that yours before the marriage, you can show that.
I guess that could be a little touchy, you know, because nobody ever goes into a marriage thinking they're going to be divorced, but if you're keeping track, why would you need to?
Well, you might say, look, I think we're going to be married forever, but I don't want you telling me how I'm going to spend this money over here. I don't want you, you know, when I'm getting myself the things that I like to spend our money on, I at least don't want you complaining to me about. So that does come into play. There are people that say, hey, we're going to be happily ever after, but I just want to make sure I control what's mine and you control what's yours.
And I guess it makes sense for people, you know, who come into a marriage with a lot less than the other person, and then they only stay married for, you know, 72 days or, you know, 6 months or whatever. But what about people who stay in a long-term marriage and the other person was much wealthier before, and they've been married for 35 years and had children and all that? Still applies, huh?
The longer you're together, the more things get mixed up, and if they're mixed up and you can't really show where it all came from, the more likely it is to be treated as community property. So in situations like that, but you know, assuming one person started out with an inheritance of $10 million and the whole marriage, they kept that in a separate account, then it's probably going to stay that way, but that's a pretty unusual situation for most people.
Same thing with like lottery winnings. You win now. If you win the lottery as a married person,
well, that can depend where the money came from. Did it come from your separate property, or did you take it out of your paycheck? And if it came out of your paycheck or something,
then it belongs to both.
Then it's community property. Yeah.
That I never thought about that.
Yeah. you earned you put in the sweat equity, scratching off the numbers or such.
I guess that could turn kind of comical, couldn't it? As to.
But the thing is to understand it going into a marriage, because a lot of people think, you know, instantly half and half.
What's his is mine and mine is his.
And that's not true. And if you have stuff you want to keep it separate, keep track of it.
Keep track of it. Okay, Craig, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.